This is an age of disruption, of profound revolutionary change.
What we're really asking ministers is to empower the ambassadors.
The only thing that you really push forth is the truth.
You don't see many women represented when it comes to the decisions as to how to handle the pandemic.
Hello and welcome back. My name is POLITICO. I'm a reporter covering the economy and finance at POLITICO Europe. I just wanted to introduce Jan Mischke, who will give us an opening remark from our knowledge partner, McKinsey Global Institute. And he's joining us online because, as you probably know, Switzerland has closed its airspace today. So welcome, Jan.
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction, for the invitation, so that I can't be here in person. I would like to strongly echo the sentiment of the previous speaker in terms of we are stronger together, but we also need a little bit of a cold shower. And I think also Commissioner Gentiloni earlier voiced already the idea that we might need a next version of a Generation EU fund in the spirit of really growing closer together as a union. And as we emerge from the pandemic and have shown great resolve in now tackling the next crisis on energy and defense, I would argue, based on research that we recently published and they also can find on the Invent platforms, that we actually need the same resolve right now to also tackle a slow motion crisis in corporate competitiveness and technology that has been unfolding over the last decade or so. As our research shows, we have analyzed the data of 12,000 large firms with more than $1 billion in revenues globally. European firms over the 5 years prior to the pandemic have grown 40% more slowly than their US competitors and invested 40% less in R&D. Of course, a fair share of that, 60 to 70%, is related to what is typically called tech or the tech industry, but it's broader and it's spreading throughout the economic fabric. Just think of the automotive industry, where 2 of the 3 global leaders are European, but where the race on autonomous electric mobility is much more open. Think about luxury goods, where 90% of global brand value is from Europe. But where is Europe in the race for wearable devices? So what we did next is we identified the 10 key technologies that will matter most for the future and scored them: Europe, China, and the US. And unfortunately, Europe, on average, scores 30% lower than the respective leading region in the world. And it leads on only 2 of the 10 technologies. Of course, most of the digital technologies are the ones where Europe is lacking. We already heard previously around its lack in AI and lack in venture capital investments and so on. But even in those where it is still leading in materials and in clean tech, it might risk losing its edge, where much of the patenting and external funding, for instance, in the next wave of clean tech, like nuclear fusion or smart grids, are happening in the US. If we leave that unaddressed, our estimates suggest that we risk leaving value added of $2 to $4 trillion a year on the table in the next 2 decades. That is 6 times the amount needed for the net zero transition. And we also jeopardize our strategic autonomy. So what is it then that can turn the tide? And in a nutshell, in a time where disruptive innovation matters, where you quickly need to scale and invest into new technologies, and where also geopolitics matter more, scale and speed just matter so much more than they did in the past. And this is where I would like to link it also to what was commented on previously, the need to work much more closely together. And also, as we now think about deploying funds from the Next Generation EU or the RRF into an environment that is already inflationary and characterized by increasing resource constraints and tight labor markets, we should really be smart about how can we use those funds right now rather than the next version of a Next Generation EU facility to really build the technological capabilities that we need urgently. And just imagine, European governments are spending about 2 trillion euros a year on public procurement. Imagine we could pool more of that for joint innovation procurement at the EU level in areas from defense to energy to healthcare. Imagine the kind of at-scale markets that would create. Imagine the kind of cross-border competition that would encourage, allowing European firms to step up to where their global competitors already are. With that, I look very much forward to thoughts from the panel and the broader audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jan. And I would like to please welcome on stage our distinguished guest today. So, Madam Director General Céline Gauer, who is the head of the Recovery and Resilience Task Force of the European Commission, Alessandro Rivera, Director General of the Italian Treasury, and Valentin Weger, head of the Unit EU budget at the Austrian Ministry of Finance. Please welcome on stage. Thank you. And we can give them a round of applause. I just want to keep encourage you to submit questions to the swap card app. I hope that we can take as many as we want, so I'll try to keep it lively and snappy, and to tweet with the hashtag political competition. So welcome everybody, and maybe I'll start with you, Madame Gauer. On 1 year on after the first plans were approved, where are we at? Is there some indicators, some measure of the successes that you can give us?
No, thank you very much. I think 1 year on, it goes pretty well. We have 25 plans approved, and numbers do not only matter because they're also very good plan approved with a very good mix of structural reforms and investments. We have the payment requests that have started flowing in, and the payment requests are simply a sign that the implementation is really making steady progress in all the member states. And we have already been able to disburse 100 billion euro in such a short period of time. So I think it goes really well and fast in terms of implementation.
In terms of some of the main lessons that can be drawn from the first year of implementing such a program, which, just to remind the audience, it's a huge amount of work. It's a pay by result, so the money is disbursed upon completion of certain commitments, so-called milestones and targets, which each country has negotiated and agreed with the Commission. So perhaps I'll go to the representative from EU countries here. Can you give us a little bit of a perspective on what are the lessons learned so far, Mr. Rivera?
Well, the lesson learned so far, I think we are already in a position to say that this experience is having success. It has allowed us to learn a different institutional approach. We have to prepare our own plan. There is certainly a lot of domestic ownership. We had our discussion with the Commission in charge of assessing the plans, in charge of monitoring them, and then of course, we have the involvement of all the other member states, both in the setup of the plan and then in monitoring how they are being implemented. This is already a valuable experience, I would say, per se. Is something that we have to learn from and, of course, improve and possibly use in other possible projects and work stream in the coming future. We have learned a lot from the previous crisis, I would say. We have learned the mistakes that we made at that time in 2011 and the much less than optimal coordination that we have been able to achieve at that time. And on the basis of that experience, we have reacted in a totally different way. And this has proven to be much more effective and functional on the field. This is also something that we have already achieved, and I think is a value that we will have to keep there and learn from. Final point I would mention is confidence. The symbolic effect that this plan has had for also the image that the European Union has outside on the markets. We have shown that we are able to make decisions. We are able to make them in a timely manner. We are able to make them to the size and level of ambition that is needed. This has provided a huge added value in terms of the confidence on markets. To say one important aspect, we had, after the pandemic erupted, we had a sudden increase in volatility. Markets reacted very negatively. This has been calmed down for many reasons, but I would certainly put NextGenerationEU in the first place.
Thank you. Valentin, you come from a country which wasn't so keen on this plan at the very start. Are you a convert now?
Well, I would argue it's too early to tell. As Celine said, there have been roughly 100 billion euros in payouts. There has been pre-financing, so upfront payments to member states, no matter if they have achieved any targets. So this is, of course, a good thing to kickstart the plan. I would say that indeed we have to wait a bit because the first the first payments were linked to that member states got were linked to achievements and milestones in their plan that were more or less linked to reforms, which are very important, of course, but often in a sense that a law is being passed or an investment guideline is being published. I think the big challenge will be the investments that will come up now. So to reach the targets that you laid out for the investments that you want to do, and I think this will just come with the next sort of payment request that will come in. And let me say, I think what is a success is the delivery mode of this program. It's new. It's based on performance, meaning that, as Alessandro said, member states had to draft a plan that included reforms and investment. I think this is a very good link and a very good blueprint also for the future. Maybe the next generation of cohesion funding within the European budget, which is, as I want to remind you, as large as the grants part of the RF. So I think this could be an excellent blueprint for the future indeed. Not necessarily the debt part, but let's not talk about this for the moment.
Maybe we'll come back to that.
Yes, yes. But the delivery mode is really good, and I think for the rest, for when it comes to the lasting effect, I think it's a bit early to tell.
Thank you. In terms of delays and timeline, I wanted to ask, in terms of this has an end date, so in 2026, all the money will have to be used, or will be lost. We know how challenging it is sometimes for governments to keep to this strict schedule. Are we on track with most of the countries? And I will just go quickly in a round to ask you, what do you think?
I think so far we're on track. Of course, it's year one, so it's a good thing that we're on track. But it is a good. It's pretty obvious that we should be there. We're on track because when we see the reforms being passed, when we see the investments being launched, and the payment request being prepared, everything is going according to plan. Of course, it's not a week plan, so you may sometimes you may have a week of delay for publication of the law or a month of, but it's not really material because we see really that for 2022 we will be where we expected to be. That has to be continued over time, and what we see the success of being on time is linked to the very strong political ownership at national level. I think that works. That is a key element for the success. And the second one is a very good cooperation with the Commission. And that cooperation, the way it's been implemented, with or without having signed the operation arrangement yet, we can really see that this is working and is getting traction with the member state to systematically, basically, exchange on the implementation in real time with the Commission. And that is a recipe for avoiding surprises and trouble and delay down the line. So that makes me quite optimistic so far.
Mr. Rivera, Italy is one of the countries that has benefited the most, will benefit the most, and also one with the most milestones and targets, and you front-loaded them, so meaning you said we will do everything up front. Is that a challenge? Are you on track with that? And politically, Italy will go to elections next year. Are you confident that we can keep this rhythm going forward?
Yes. Just one brief comment. Certainly the Italian plan is the largest in absolute amount. So it's the largest plan in that respect. But I mean, if you look at the subsidy component, it's the 13th. So, I mean, if you have to build a consistent plan of continental reach, you, of course, have to address the problems in their sides, and of course the size of the economy also matters. However, the size is significant and the challenge is high. Valentin has recalled one of the key features of the Next Generation EU and the plans. The performance based. They are performance based. So the orientation to the result is very high, I would say, and also the attention of and the pressure by the public opinion is correspondingly high. So we constantly have reports on where we are and where we are heading to, what is missing, why. This is remaining in the Italian media constantly, and we are doing quite well. We have achieved all the results planned for 2021 on schedule. There were 51. And we are on track for delivering on those expected for the first half of 2022. There are 45, and we are, I would say, almost there.
So can we expect a payment request from Italy within already? Yes,
we are aligning our timeline with that of the holidays in Brussels. No, but I think we will deliver by the end of the month. We will have a final check on whether we are there. It was planned to be reached by the end of June. I guess that more or less we should be able to achieve all of them. You said there is a front loading, but the front loading has been made with the rationale. So we front loaded the enablers. So the reforms that are needed for being effective then in delivering on what comes next.
Thank you. Valentin, in terms of looking at your peers, are they on track according to you?
Well, maybe first of all, looking at ourselves, to be frank, I mean, we decided maybe we get 1% of the whole grants component, so that's quite little. However, we are putting it to good use, and we decided to have one payment request per year. I think Italy decided for, at least in the beginning, for 2. So that means we have 44 of these milestones and targets. And just to be frank, there's, for instance, one where it's an investment into laptops for pupils, where it turns out that apparently the procurers of these laptops are not able to get, at least for now, the targeted amount. Because in your plan, you have targets. It has to be clearly defined. So you have 160,000 laptops. And for the moment, we're not there yet. We were confident to reach that in early September, and then we're ready for our payment request. But this just shows how it works. This is performance-based. Of course, you could argue whether how big is the performance of delivering laptops. I think the output is that the school children then can work with it, of course. But I mean, the measurement is, it is measured against this target of achieving 160,000 laptops. Looking at other member states, I mean, we are, of course, in contact, both by the Commission channels and bilaterally. And the technical background is that you can only make a payment request once you have the so-called operational arrangement, which is a document where you specify for every targeted milestone the conditions when they are met, because this is very important, because otherwise you cannot assess whether the milestone has been successfully achieved or not, and this allows the Commission then to sort of recommend the disbursement of the funds. in our case, the negotiations for these operational arrangements have been now taken longer than negotiation the plan itself. This is a tricky work. And once we have it, we can submit a payment request. As far as I know, there have been 12 of these operational arrangements. So at the moment, I think any data coming, new member states, of course, but that means at the moment only 12 member states can potentially make a payment request. So I mean, from these figures alone, maybe we are a bit lagging behind. I mean, this would be the impression from a member state looking at the peers. But I think we all sit in the same boat. We all have to work within the framework of the RF regulation, of course. And the regulation itself was, of course, drawn up in very little time. And I would also argue there could be room for improvement when it comes to maybe lessen the administrative burden that is behind it. Because this is also an interesting observation that once you're now on the implementing side of a EU program, you notice that there's also administrative burden attached to the exercise. Some of it is necessary, some of it is maybe a bit exaggerated.
Okay, I'm sure that Gauer may want to come back to that, but I wanted to pick up on something that you said on the snags of implementing it. There is now a very different inflationary environment compared to when we started, and something that's been popping up in the news, certainly in Italy, but also in Spain, Portugal, other member states, is that because these plans and these investments were costed over a year ago, now these prices don't correspond to reality. There is a shortage of everything. Prices are going up, from labor to steel to laptops or anything else. So I wonder two things. First is how much of an impact will that have? And is that grounds enough for the Commission to allow member states to tweak their plans? And for non-RRF nerds, as I describe myself, there is rules that provide for the changing of the plans when there are certain objective circumstances which are met. So having the woman of the hour ask you, is inflation an objective circumstance allowing for changing the plans?
Thank you very much. So, as you rightly say, the plans were costed upon adoption, and while you have a certain level of inflation that was already factored in, it is lower than what we observe in the member states today. I think the criteria and what we will look at is whether inflation makes a particular target or a particular milestone impossible to achieve. And that is really the threshold. The threshold is not just, well, things are becoming a bit more expensive across the board. It's no, is that particular target, which may be linked, for example, to an infrastructure project where you may have a very good ground to have a look at it, but it's not across the board. It doesn't affect reforms, and it doesn't affect some of the investments that are not measured or defined as essentially a unit cost implicitly multiplied by a certain cost. So it's only a portion of the plan that could be directly affected. And then it's really for the member state to see how they want to address that. Because the fact that prices are becoming higher doesn't mean, for example, if you take renewables or energy efficiency, doesn't mean that the urgency of investing into those has decreased. And what we see now today with the new geopolitical circumstances this time is that this urgency is still there. So then it is for the member states to see whether they want to meet the targets by adding, as Italy is planning to do, some national resources to make sure, like a bit of a co-financing as we know it from structural funds, to make sure that the targets will nevertheless be reached and a performance then made. So it's not a broad general discussion. There's no tweaking. I think it's a very, very rigorous legal framework. So there's amendment of plans only, and it has to be duly reasoned in relation to this particular cost item in that particular investment. I think it's important if we want to keep on track to bring things from a general and high-level worry to something extremely rigorous and down to earth.
Understood. So, Madam Gauer already told us, but how is Italy planning to amend its plan if it is planning to do so?
No, we are not planning amendments, at least for the time being. Of course, it's a long-term plan. It lasts until 2026, and of course, there can be relevant changes, and certainly there have been very relevant ones in the framework. However, we think also that the plan has been designed having a long-term perspective, addressing some loopholes, some weaknesses, some strategic goals. We, of course, drew a lot on country-specific recommendations to solve long-standing problems. These have not disappeared because of inflation. This is a first point. Of course, inflation and some disruptions in the supply chains make the delivery of some of those objectives more challenging. So far, we don't have evidence of proven impossibility to get there. Otherwise, we would certainly be considering submitting a request for a change in the plan. What we have done, we have set up a fund at the national level with our own resources, 7.5 billion, dedicated to address the increase in the costs in the public works. So this should help in remaining on track, also with respect to the recovery plan.
I wanted to maybe talk about another challenge hurling our way, which is obviously the war in Ukraine, and how can the recovery fund be adapted to answer to part of that. The Commission has requested member states to draw up additional chapters to their plan, and the way which is supposed to be delivering on energy independence in the EU. The way that it wants to finance that, beyond issuing certain emission permits, 20 billion of those, and we'll see how those get divided between the member states. But it's also to encourage countries that haven't done so yet to tap the unused portion of loans. So a large part of that, if I'm not mistaken, around 220, are still available to member states. And I wanted to ask you, Mr. Veget, as Austria hasn't tapped loans so far, is there an incentive for you to do so now?
I mean, honestly, the loans would also be an answer to the problem of inflation. You can also request loans if sort of you're faced with the inflation. I think this is also an option. What is also important that you don't reduce your ambition. So I think I'm totally with Céline on that question. On the loans, for Austria, it would not make sense to request because, I mean, you could look at the yields of government bonds and you would see that Austria is slightly doing better than the EU bonds. By the way, a very concerning development in recent days and weeks. Yields are going up, which also means that the financing of the NextGenerationEU is getting more costly than anticipated. As you know, the interest is being paid by the EU budget, mainly by member states or by the member states that request a loan. So it's important to also take note that the money is not for free. So no, we are not planning to use those loans. The Repower EU discussion that is now being done and also in the good hands of the French presidency, there's now even, I think we now even would have to say whether we plan to take one or not in order that the Commission, together with those member states who need loans, are able to quickly decide on how to distribute them, because I think they are now really needed in terms of these rising yields on government bonds.
Therefore, if there are leftover loans, can you please explain us how will the Commission administer those and direct them to who needs most?
I think already now the indicative cap on the loan that each member state can take is on the indicative. So with or without a change of the regulation, it is already possible if there are some leftover, then for the interested member states to take them up. I think what we have some experience with the SURE instrument that we had for short-time work scheme during the crisis, on basically going in rounds and seeking the interest of member states to make sure that the remaining loans are apportioned and distributed in a fair manner. But I do expect indeed much more interest in the loan in the coming weeks and months than we had so far. It should be said actually that for some member states like Spain, it was always a plan to start by allocating the ground part and then to turn in a second stage to the loan. So that's also very much as planned from the beginning.
In terms of these Repower EU chapters, your mandate is please draw up plans so that we can achieve independence from Russian fossil fuels well before 2030. Now, we see now the President of the Commission and others going around and looking for alternative sources of energy. What I wanted to ask is there a risk that this money and EU taxpayers' money will be invested in more fossil projects? This could be LNG terminals, pipelines to connect landlocked states and so on in the short term, so that even though the long-term goal is getting rid of fossil fuels, what we're doing to secure our energy while we get there by 2050 is actually investing more into fossil.
Thanks a lot. That's a very delicate balance to find, because of course the long-term goal, or the 2030, 2050, which is not that long-term in a way, goal remains exactly the same, namely to phase out fossil fuel altogether. But we have to be realistic, and if we do want indeed to be independent from Russian fossil fuel earlier than 2030, for some countries that will mean a redirection of flow. So it doesn't mean more gas being used, for example, but it means a different gas, or gas replacing the Russian gas in the short run. That may need, as you mentioned, some targeted investment, for example, in a floating LNG terminal, or in a reverse flow, or in a compressor station on a pipe. What we are trying to do is to acknowledge simply that these needs are there, because it is a priority for us to stop financing the war in Ukraine, but that we should limit them, because we want that to become stranded cost as early as possible. So we should limit those investments to what is strictly necessary for the security of supply, and the view on the security of supply should be a regional one, not just one member state each having its LNG terminal, but just really looking at how can we limit those investments to the maximum, and only those that are absolutely indispensable for security of supply. And that's why we are working also with a network of transmission system operators for gas, to really identify those projects that can be ready quickly, because if it's to come online much later, it doesn't make any sense, and to limit them really to what is strictly necessary. So overall, I don't expect from these chapters in the Repower EU chapters that you will find a lot of fossil. You will find a little bit fossil, but mostly you will find reforms, you will find still more efforts on renewables, on energy efficiency, on hydrogen, on things that are future-proof, and not investment on fossil. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to touch on two big unknowns. One is what will happen if there is a change in government, or if a government changes its mind, which is not impossible, as we've seen. So political ownership, as you all touched upon, is very important for these plans to ensure that what we have agreed actually gets done. Can you tell us, in your experience so far, what has been some of the most difficult political discussions, without naming and shaming, but what are the key pressure points where the balance between the Commission and the Member States, you struggle to find it?
Thanks a lot. It's an interesting question, and if you look back, you see that we had that question already during the elaboration of the plans, because the negotiation of the plan took a little while until we then got the plan adopted, and then it continues. And we had a few examples where the government changed in the negotiation of the plan. And the first reaction of the incumbent government was, we'll do it all different. It will be completely different. And then it took generally a few weeks to realize that a very, very large portion of the plan was actually the same. And why is that? Because some of the things are complete must. These are on the investments, obviously. If you need to invest in climate-relevant assets, then that's going to be the same, whatever the color of the government. And even for some reforms, because they are addressing the country-specific recommendation, as Alessandro was recalling, so the frame for the reform is pretty established. So already during the elaboration of the plans, we saw that the change were not as massive as we could expect. We have also seen already a number of changes of government after the adoption of the plan, and here we see exactly the same pattern. That starts by, we're going to do it all different, and then we start discussing, and we start realizing that within the milestone, very often you have a lot of margin of maneuver to achieve the result but do it with slightly different accent or intonation, so that the different political colors can find themselves. So the main risk I see for changes of government is essentially delay, because by the time that is needed for them to rethink and then come to the conclusion that most of the plan is actually still valid for them as well, then of course may derail a little bit the implementation. But in my experience so far, it doesn't delay it for very long, because the attraction of getting the payment on schedule, and if you delay, then you will not get it, is quite big. So it's going to come still more. But so far we've been able to, I think, contain it in a smart way, together with incoming governments, to elaborate the flexibility within the milestone and not to rethink and redo the complete plan. 2026 is really tomorrow, so there's not much time for rethinking.
Thank you. I wanted to put maybe a question to Mr. Rivera from the audience, from Matteo Guidi, who is asking, are you considering to adopt a Repower EU chapter to address the energy crisis and independence from Russian gas? And what will be Italy's top priorities in that chapter?
We are working on it. We have, of course, appreciated the initiative taken by the Commission, and certainly this is an urgent need and priority, so we need to address it. And I think that also in this case, well, the Next Generation EU already had a large part of it, as Celine recalled, dedicated to energy matters. But of course, the strategic environment has changed a lot. So we need to double on our effort. The added value of the Next Generation EU is the possibility to address these EU-wide common interest projects in a coordinated manner. And this is all the more the case in these circumstances. We have the transition, but together with that we have the issue of the strategic autonomy from Russian gas. This cannot be looked at from the perspective of a single member state. So it is very important that we are dealing with a European public good, that we do it in a coordinated manner, so that the plans talk to each other and are hopefully as consistent as possible. Externalities, positive externalities, synergies will come out of a plan designed in this way. So it was up to the Commission to come with an initiative, and they did it timely again. We will make proposals. Of course, they will be targeted to the needs that emerged, which is autonomy. We have to diversify our sources of energy, and we have, of course, to reinforce the infrastructure to achieve this objective. We will have to do it in a sustainable manner. We are already discussing at a very preliminary stage with the Commission. We both agree on the fact, for instance, that if we are building new infrastructure, this should be hydrogen ready. So natural gas, we have always made the point that is an essential energy source for the transition. But it is true, this is not going to lead to more demand in fossil fuel. On the contrary, these plans should speed up the transition. But meanwhile, of course, we have to deal and tackle the issues and the challenges raised by the war in Ukraine.
Thank you. I would like to come back to the issue which we shouldn't touch upon, but well, two actually. One is repayment. So one of the reasons that the EU is getting its AAA rating and so on, it's because this whole borrowing is backed by the EU budget. But we know there are on the table proposals on how to repay it, and that is by levying additional resources at EU level, the so-called new own resources. So I wanted to ask, what is your idea for repaying NextGenEU that way, as Austria, as Italy, and as the Commission? Maybe if you can give us a timeline for when you want to have concrete decisions on this repayment schedule.
Should I go first? First of all, there's a meeting of the Ministers of Finance on Friday that will in particular discuss, among other things, this issue. I just want to stress that in any case, even if there are no new own resources, at any moment in time, the repayment is guaranteed through the regular payments of the EU budget. So the own resources, the so-called G&I own resources, is the one that balances all financing needs that are left. So it's not, in a sense, strictly true that you need new own resources in order to repay the common debt. I think this is an important point to make. Indeed, there's a basket of own resources now on the table. Some of them are not that realistic, I would say. There's another one coming next year on also issues that on tax basis that probably need more discussion. But I think in the end, there will be an intensive discussion on that. For the moment, I would say one of the more pressing issues, and I alluded to that, is that we're seeing the interest rates going up. So it's the present MFF until 2027 that needs to already pay the interest rates on the debt that is being done now. So that's a bit alarming if you look at the developments here. But again, at any case, also because rating agencies are, of course, looking closely, the repayment is safeguarded. I think this is very important to stress and underline.
Dr. Rivera.
Well, I think the repayment schedule will have to be made in a balanced way, so that of course it does square with the emerging needs in the member states and of course in the European budget. But one thing that I would say is that it would be important that the European Union as an issuer remains on the markets. This calls for liquidity of the instruments. This is having a significant positive effect that benefits all, I would say, the member states and the depth and liquidity of the European bond market. It becomes a reference. It creates effects of crowding in for national debt. I think it is important when thinking of medium and long term also to consider this objective and take it on board, among the other things, of course, the need to repay the debt that is due. This is a given.
Maybe a last word to finish where we started. As in 1 year on, one of the big successes of the NextGenerationEU has been the borrowing, precisely. I think that the success that we've had as an emerging borrower to that scale on the market, and the launch of huge volumes of green bonds in particular that have been welcome and accepted by the market is something that is really worth mentioning. I think the capacity is there. It works fine. The repayment is not in danger, and the provisioning that had been made for that is still fine. So I think this is something that we've learned pretty fast how to do, and that is benefiting indeed the whole of the EU. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will close it. We are running out of time, but I will close it with maybe yes or no, or just one sentence answer. There's been a lot of talk of repeating the experience. We also heard it from Commissioner Gentiloni earlier on. This particular instrument is a one-off, also legally, we know it very well, but there is talk of repeating the governance of the RRF in other instruments, and also possibly to have a EU treasury of sorts, or at least some investment capacity, and make that permanent. So I would like each of you to tell me which version do you think, what could be kept from the RRF, the joint debt, the governance, nothing at all, and just very quickly going through in inverted order this time.
So on the performance-based and on the combination of reform and investment, I think which were two of the novelties, yes, absolutely, because that has already demonstrated that it works. On the joint borrowing, I think we will need to show that it delivers, and it's too early to say. It's only 1 year. If it delivers, yes, it should absolutely be repeated, but we still have to prove that, and we're working hard on it.
Thank you.
Definitely yes. I think this has been a massive improvement to the European institutional framework for the many reasons I recalled. I think the experience so far has proven to be positive. Of course, it will need to continue to be monitored and tested and possibly improved. But the features that Celine has recalled are certainly worth being kept there. A performance-based approach, the mix of investments and reforms. And I have already said that the common debt, the European safe asset, however you would like to call it, is a plus, is a benefit for the European Union and for the member states. One of the strategic objectives, just to mention an additional thing, is the relevance of the euro as a global currency. If we don't have a euro-denominated debt at the European Union level, it is difficult to reach that objective.
Thank you.
And I will finish where I started. So I think the governance model is the one that is the big legacy, I would say, since really this is a little revolution. If it's tweaked in a bit more, less administrative burden, as I indicated, it could be the blueprint for the next MFF. 2/3 of the MFF, by the way, way more agriculture and cohesion together are way more than the 750 that the NGO is made up. If the delivery mode is modeled like the RF, I think this would be a big step going in the direction of performance. Rather than just looking at invoices. In particular, also due to the challenges that we're facing with the climate targets, etc., so agriculture, for instance. So performance on these issues, very key. When it comes to debt, I mean, the good news, in a sense, is that the European Commission will remain on the markets until 2058, because this is the last year where the NGO debt will be repaid, and the Commission is allowed to refinance their bonds until then. So by default, there will be a presence of the European Union on the markets and more than 30 years from now. So yes, and as you said, it's a one-off. So I think I would keep it there. But the positive note is it will remain on the markets for the precise reason that the instrument is designed in the way it is designed.
Thank you all so much, and thank you all for being here. I would like to just say that we have another session after a 10 minutes networking break, so have a walk around and then come back for a spotlight discussion moderated by my colleague Samuel Stolten, who is the technology competition reporter on the EU's love for startups and SMEs. Thank you.
This is an age of disruption, of profound revolutionary change.
What we're really asking ministers is to empower the ambassadors.
The only thing that you really push forth is the truth.
You don't see many women represented when it comes to the decisions as to how to handle the pandemic.